Welcome to the More Perfect Union, the podcast that offers real debate without the hate. I'm Kevin Kelton, and I'm joined by Greg Matusak.
Hey, Kevin. This week, I feel like I'm the American version of Loverboy because all I've been doing is working for this weekend. Thank you. I'm glad someone got that reference.
And Joe Ciart, are you excited about this weekend?
I'm excited for this weekend, and I'm glad that bullying gave me a killer wit and didn't make me a killer.
Good point. And
Wow.
Jennifer Peterson is returning. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me back. They say third time's a charm. This is my third time, so I hope I don't screw anything up.
You're already charming. You were charming before we started.
Oh, thank goodness.
So this week, we have a lot to talk about, some not so happy, but we're going to start with happy news first. As my friends here know, and some of the people who follow me on Facebook know, I had a little change in my life this past week, about a week ago yesterday. I got married.
Yay.
Yay, Mazel Tov. Congratulations.
To the lovely
Yay.
Jessica. Thank you. And as I was telling Joe before the podcast, I proposed, I think in 2018, and we had really kind of targeted 2020 to be the year. And then the COVID thing happened, and it was like, well, we're not going to do it now. And then we moved to Texas, and then other stuff happened. And then I had some illnesses. Then we got COVID again. And as we started to look at our calendar, it just seemed like we better just do this. So we did a very small, it was actually just us and a justice of the peace. Actually, the justice of the peace stood us up. It was his secretary or his assistant, who happens to be what they call an officiant in Texas. And so she was legally able to marry us. And that's how we did it.
He just didn't show up. I mean, please explain
listen to
that.
this. Even though it was only going to be the three of us, I know now I'm going longer than I anticipated on this topic, but even though it was just going to be me and Jessica, and then we were planning to go out later that night with friends. But Jessica, she has been looking forward to this for a long time, and it's a big thing to both of us. And especially, I think women really value that day. And she had an appointment to get her hair done, makeup done, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And we're taking a walk at like 9 a.m. before she's ready to go off for her hair and makeup appointment. And we get a call from the judge's office saying something came up and he's not going to be able to make it today. We have to reschedule.
That's nuts.
And we were not happy about that. Especially Jessica was a little distraught about that because she had booked these appointments that, first of all, you have to pay for. You can't cancel them at the last minute and get out of it.
I got married once before.
Yeah,
So,
there you go. But we were able to, after some back and forth with them, we were able to convince, well, first of all, she said, well, he'll be in. If you could come in earlier in the day, he'll do it. So we moved our appointment up and then he still didn't show.
Oh,
wow. That's so rude.
Yes.
Did your officiant say words like, give a homily or a speech, or did they just?
She did. And she told us that she's done about 250 of these things.
Wow.
Many of them over Zoom during the pandemic.
Is that because the guy never showed up? So she's just been stepping in every time he decides not to do it.
It might be.
Wow.
So she was not polished, but she did a nice job. But she was reading some platitudes that I think she was reading off of a prepared text.
Did she get your
So
names
she
right?
didn't really have a type 5 or anything like that.
No, she didn't. But we read some vows to each other, and that was really nice. And then
romantic. That's very romantic.
It is.
Yeah, it was
Nice to know love is still out there in the air.
Yeah, and she looked fantastic, and she had on a veil and everything. It was great.
Aw.
Well, enough about the officiant. How did Jessica look? Thank you.
Anyways, we're not going to spend more time on this. We didn't really know how to start this particular podcast because we do have some heavy subjects to broach. But we also know that people have followed us for a long time. They've heard me talk about Jessica many, many times. And so this couldn't go without being mentioned. So thank you for allowing me to mention it on the air, as we say. Now turning to the news of the week. It's America's new active shooter craze. All the kids are doing it. What have we had now? 3 or 4 mass shootings in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Buffalo, Laguna
Ready to
Woods.
keep up with almost.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that sad that we can't even, there's so many. I mean, every day. It's like, it's horrifying. It's insane.
I don't even know how to get into it. Obviously, everyone in the country is just aghast at what happened. But there's also some issues that have come up besides just the question of guns and gun violence. There's a lot of things that came up even just today with the police revising their story and their timeline about what happened in the 1 hour and 16 minutes between when the shooter entered the building and when the shooter lost his life.
I heard it today, and through the whole thing, I was just flabbergasted. At one point, he blamed a teacher for allowing the shooter in.
Yeah, one teacher who left the door ajar, which, by the way, I'd like to get some specificity on that because I'm not sure that's exactly right. But anyways, go ahead.
Right. So there was that. There was the barricade incident where they misread the situation, the police officers. They kept parents at bay, some by almost arresting some. The whole thing was mishandled from start to finish.
It's really hard to cover stuff up and try to protect her. And when we've got the 911 calls right out there, they're there. And I can't imagine being a parent who is finding out that their child tried to save their life and the life of their friends. And those teachers are heroes. Those teachers, those two incredible teachers who passed, who were murdered. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say passed, who were murdered. Those incredible women.
There's still some gaping holes of information, even with the updated information that they gave us today. But one thing seems pretty obvious to me. Some of those kids were shot probably multiple times, and I'm sure died the instant that they were shot. But some of them might have been savable in that, that hour and 16 minutes or that hour and 10 minutes, whatever it was. And the fact that these police officers did not, with everything they had, try to get through that door. It's too early to find fault, but my suspicions and my fears are that there was some major miscalculations made. And the lawsuits that come out of this, oh my gosh, it's going to be unbelievable. Because so many things were not handled properly. Greg, you alluded to several of those. I keep thinking we've now seen that video, that cell phone video of the parents, the grief-stricken parents trying to go to the school, and the police are there. And there are cops there, officers. I don't like the word cops. There are officers there who are in body armor, holding automatic weapons, in helmets, doing crowd control. Why weren't they in that goddamn building?
And there was from what I hear, there was one person, one commander they were all looking at. Tomorrow it could come out different. This is the thing. This is one of those stories where we're going to get new news tomorrow, possibly. But we also have to be really careful to not let them reframe this. I mean, this has to be right. I mean, they're
reframing it. They're reframing it. Yeah.
I know, but this has to be the catalyst for major change in this country. If it doesn't happen after this, I don't even know what to say anymore. It's just, every country's looking at us like, what the hell is the United States doing? These countries are looking at us like, we don't have this problem.
I happen to be one of those people that thinks that the Second Amendment is highly flawed. And I don't sit idly by when people talk about, well, what about the Second Amendment? The Second Amendment, just because a guy who owned and raped slaves put a comma in the wrong place doesn't mean that we should be living by that for, another 250 years.
I was born in a family. They all went hunting. I was raised around guns when I was young. I was in a gun safety course. With my family all being hunters, my dad just assumed, oh, this guy's going to hunt. And it's tough because I'm not anti-gun, but I'm not hugely pro-gun.
People talk about that liberals want to take away your guns, okay? It's suppose that 5 years ago, they had passed a law, let's say after Sandy Hook, they had passed a law that says we're no longer manufacturing AK-47s and guns like that in this country, okay? that gun wouldn't have been in the gun shop for him to buy. So when people say, oh, they're still going to get that weapon anyways, they won't if it doesn't exist. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to be able to get rid of every existing one in the country. But boy, there's no reason that we have to keep selling more.
Yeah. So in several countries like New Zealand, Australia, England, Canada, most of their current gun laws were sparked from a great tragedy in 1996 in Australia, in 2019 in New Zealand. And usually what happened was a mass shooting. In Australia, I believe it was 19 children. There was one with 50. But in all these countries, automatic, semi-automatic weapons were banned. And we've had assault rifle bans before, okay? Up until 2004, we had an assault rifle ban, and it worked great.
Why does this country have such an obsession with guns compared to other countries? And my father was a World War II bomber pilot. My grandfather was an admiral in World War II. I come from a military family. No guns. My dad never felt the desire to have a gun in our house. I always felt protected. I am so grateful that I wasn't raised around that, because I think that so many people are, and they just think it's like, oh, that's the way everyone is. Like, no, that's not the way everyone is. And my dad was very anti-gun because he had seen what bombs and guns had done. He saw the worst of the worst. So of course he didn't want them in the house. Why don't we have more of that? This is what I don't understand.
I grew up in a house where guns were so common, and not only guns were so common, but loaded guns were so common. My father hid guns around the house. Like at a moment's notice, you could just find a loaded gun. This was when I was very, very small. And I remember like looking for like a pair of socks, and there would be a gun in the sock drawer, or in the library, there would be a gun like hidden behind a book.
Wow.
There were always guns hidden, loaded guns without safeties everywhere around our house. And there was an accident when I was in college. One of the guns went off, and eventually my sister stopped bringing her children to the house once they got to be about 1 or 2. And my dad finally got a gun safe. But I myself don't own a gun. And what stopped me from having a gun was when my father took me shooting one day, and he said, you don't pull a gun on someone to stop them, to make them freeze or to halt. The only time you pull a gun on someone is to kill them. He said, so don't get a gun unless you plan on killing someone. And because he said, so don't pull a gun and say, stop, freeze. He says, because they will take your gun and shoot you. He goes, as soon as you pull that gun out, start shooting. And I said, I'll never own a gun. I don't think I could just, he said, don't own a gun. But I've gone shooting, and I've taken police courses, police community courses. They've taught me how to shoot. They've taught me how to load a gun. I have friends who hunt. I take food from them when they hunt, and I think it's delicious.
Yeah, that's just the thing to tell a vegan. Good job, Bill.
I didn't even think about
It's magically delicious.
What a way to make friends. And
but and we're not all coming for all your guns. We aren't, because I think there is a happy medium. I think when one side hears the other side, and all they hear is, we're going to take all your guns, and right now it's justified anger, and the left hears from the right, you can't take our guns, and no one is getting across. There has to be either a cooling down or a moment of, I understand where you're coming from. And we're not having that right now. There has to be a discussion.
Okay, so let's deconstruct this, because I've thought a lot about this week as well. So why is the legal age in which you can buy a long gun in Texas? By the way, a pistol, you have to be 21. A handgun, you have to be 21, which is a federal law. But in Texas, they said, well, there's a way to get around that. We will make it 18 for a rifle or any type of long gun. So Texas stands out a little bit from some of the other states that way. Now, why did they choose 18? Because we as a society have decided that 18 is the age of adulthood, right? It's the age of consent. decades and maybe a century or more ago, young girls could get married at 16 or 15. They said, let's move that up to 18. And we as a society have just made this arbitrary line that 18 makes you an adult. There's nothing in science. Anyone who's been a parent of a 17 or a 19 or a 24-year-old knows you're not necessarily more mature at 21 than you were at 16. And sometimes people at 21 and 22 don't have that much maturity, unfortunately. So as a society, we have to go back and look. It's like, why is the legal age of maturity the age for gun ownership? A lot of people have been saying, let's move that back to 21. I frankly think that's too low. I'd like it to be 25 years old. You cannot rent a car in this country unless you're 25 years old. Now, that has to do with insurance. But why can they set that limit for renting an automobile, but not for owning an AR-15?
I mean, I just think it's all about money. I think it's all about greed and money. Every time I see, if you look at the history of what's happened in this country and the fact that now more children die from guns than anything else. It used to be auto accidents. And now I think since 2020, now the number one killer of children are guns. Guns are killing our kids. Why? For me, how's this happening? It has to be tied to money, greed. That's it.
See, I don't think it's money, and I don't think it's greed. Now, this is just me talking. Really? I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just telling you my opinion.
Yeah.
Obviously, lobbying is a factor, and a big factor.
Big time.
I think that the Republican Party, ever since Reagan got elected, has been doing a slow morph. I think Republican conservative doctrine used to lead their voters. Now they follow them, and their voters, their identity is gun ownership. They believe in the Second Amendment like they believe in the Pledge of Allegiance and the Lord up above.
But it's how the Second Amendment was pitched to them. And if you want to talk about Reagan was the first president to take money from the NRA. Reagan wouldn't have become president without that money.
But he also signed the Brady Bill, which was the first 5-day waiting period for buying a handgun. Of course, that's after he was a victim of gun violence. But Reagan was not anywhere near as far right on this issue as, let's say, Donald J. Trump is. And the party is so afraid of peeling off any portion of their base that they have decided we will reflect the wishes of our base instead of trying to lead them to a better place.
Right. It's become much more of a populist party. The other thing I think we should discuss to some extent is even the kids who aren't in school shootings or who aren't directly involved, there is a mental strain put on almost all school children now who have to go through active shooter drills. 2 of the schools that I work with went into full lockdown this week. Actually 3, but 2 of them were in the same district. Luckily, they turned out to be false alarms, but people were on edge. People have been on edge all week. Where we had tornado drills, Kevin had nuclear fallout drills, right?
Oh, yeah.
Kevin stood under a chair thinking that would save him from a mushroom cloud.
Oh, yeah. We crouched under desks and we put our hands on the brick walls in the hallway and put our hands on the back of our heads. Absolutely.
Right. And the thing about that is we all know that's ridiculous.
Right.
Right. Meanwhile, my kids are standing in the corner with a book. They're ready to throw at a shooter. And I know someday we're all going to say, well, that's ridiculous, right? Against an active shooter.
A quick story I'll share. When I was a teenager, a family friend of ours, I'll keep the story short, a family friend was doing dishes in her home in the valley. And across the street, a home was being robbed. Guy who owned the house had a gun, ran out to chase after the guy, stealing whatever stupid thing the guy stole, television or something like that. Shot the guy, missed. Bullet ricocheted off a couple of trees, went right through the kitchen window and killed our family friend. That was my introduction to how things can go very, very, very wrong. The guy who was just trying to protect his property, his life, I have no idea what happened to that guy, but my guess is that he never got over it. the devastation of what I'm seeing with what happened with these children, the devastation it's the children, it's the teachers. I mean, you guys all heard yesterday that the husband of one of the teachers died of a heart attack. And that's why I feel that if we just say things can't change or we'll never get rid of guns and we just kind of look at it in that way, nothing will get done. They'll take that and run. And then they'll just say, well, or they'll give us something. We'll give you this one thing. No. You got to give us a laundry list of things to make our kids safe.
I want to talk about Governor Greg Abbott, everybody's second to least favorite governor in the United States. Greg Abbott is, whether he likes it or not, the buck stops with him in this state, just like the buck stops at a president's desk, right? When a suicide bomber killed 13 U.S. service people on the second to last day of the Afghanistan pullout, the right wing wanted to blame Joe Biden for being ineffective. Do you think, and I ask this sarcastically because I know the answer, do you think anyone on the right side of the political spectrum is going to, for 1 inch, blame Greg Abbott for being an ineffective leader by letting this happen, letting it happen in his state, and then a pitifully insufficient police response, and then misleading the public about their insufficient response?
I'd be shocked.
No, because the line that everyone's towing in Texas, and Abbott is too, and in fact, Trump, they're all sticking to the same line. Oh, mental illness. Wow. I don't know if you know this, only America has so much mental illness. It's like a concentrated mental illness force that only America has. And that's what's causing it.
Well, and then, if you just go back to, again, the Reagan administration, because they're all Reagan conservatives, and I say that with air quotes,
yes.
He's the one that let hundreds of thousands of mentally ill people out of the mental hospitals, thereby creating much of the homeless problem that we have in this country.
They will not own that. They won't own that.
No, I have a neighbor, God bless him. He's one of my best friends on the street. He's a Trump Republican who believes that was Jimmy Carter that did that. Mm-hmm. And I tried to tell him, why don't you Google it? It was Ronald Reagan. And he won't Google it because he doesn't want to learn the facts. Let's move on to other topics. There is things that have happened in the news this week that some are also sad. Like, for instance, we lost Ray Liotta, an actor who I thought was terrific. I've never heard anybody criticize Ray Liotta. He seems to have a lot of fans. Jennifer, did you ever work with him?
No, I never worked with him. Huge fan of Ray Liotta. I actually spent time with him. A friend of mine, I went to a wedding where he was at, and there were only 6 of us at the wedding, and he was one of the 6. And he was at the time dating a friend of mine who he later married. And I spent not a lot of time with him, but it was a fun event, and then had dinner with him. And my memory of him was that he was, I had one expectation of him because I'd seen so many of his movies, and he was, I'd seen Goodfellas many times, like, oh, this guy's going to be wild. Well, quiet.
And the thing about him is that I remember the first thing I ever saw him in was a Jonathan Demme movie, Something Wild. Jeff Daniels and Melanie Griffith.
Yeah.
Right.
And he's not in it throughout the whole thing. It's like maybe the last third of the movie, but really he's outstanding in it. He has this real intensity. Melanie Griffith just kind of floats through it. Jeff Daniels is good. And it's a great Jonathan Demme film. He's a star right from the beginning, and you can't take your eyes off him.
So I have a theory as to how Ray Liotta bonded with the movie public, because he's done remarkable work, and you quoted a few of them. I also happen to like him in a small part in Field of Dreams, but there's many movies that he's done where he's been very good. But everybody thinks of Goodfellas. And obviously that's probably the most, that and Field of Dreams are the 2 most well-known films that he starred in. My theory is there were many iconic scenes in Goodfellas, but everybody always thinks of the scene where Joe Pesci's character does, what, I'm a clown? What, you think this is funny? And he's doing that to Ray Liotta's character in it, Henry Hill.
Like the most uncomfortable scene. It's such an uncomfortable scene to watch.
and Greg, I'm going to impress you in a minute with a name drop, but before I get to that, my theory of how Ray Liotta bonded with the movie audience is that scene it's a great scene. It's a classic movie scene, and anybody who's seen it cannot forget it. We all bonded with Ray Liotta because when Joe Pesci's character was doing that to him, and at later in the scene, we find out he's screwing with him, he's pulling his leg, but you think this maniac is going to go off on Ray Liotta for doing something as innocent as saying you're a funny guy. We all bonded because we felt like we were Ray Liotta in that moment, and that guy was turning on us. And you fear what's going to happen for that character. You really fear that he's going to end up getting a bullet in his head for saying, hey, you're a funny guy, you make me laugh. I think that that's one of those magic movie moments when you viscerally bond with the character on screen. And because that's such an iconic moment that many of us have seen 5-10 times, I think that's one of the reasons why Ray Liotta is such a well-liked actor.
The thing is impressive to me about Ray also is that if you look at his filmography from when he started working until, this year, he never had a year off. He was working constantly. I mean, from, films, television, Muppet movies. I mean, he did
Operation Dumbo Drop.
Exactly.
Right after Corinna.
Yes.
Corinne. Yeah.
Yes. So
because he really did have a wide range.
He'll be missed for sure.
I promised something when we were talking about Ray Liotta because I love to name drop on Greg Matusa. It's one of the things that I live for. So this is not a 1 degree of separation, Greg. It's a 2 degree of separation. Okay. As you guys, I'm sure know and sure remember, the character that Ray was playing in Goodfellas was Henry Hill.
Right.
And Henry Hill is a real individual. I believe he's still alive, who was a mafioso who went state's evidence, turned to become a government witness, and then wrote this book after he was placed in the witness protection program. Did you guys know that?
Yes, read the book even.
Okay. My older brother is now a federal judge. Before that, he was a prosecutor. And for a little while, he was a Justice Department prosecutor who prosecuted organized crime and RICO statutes. And he was one of the prosecutors who cross-examined or examined and got testimony from Henry Hill.
No kidding. That's cool.
Yeah. And he, when the movie came out and he said, yeah, I talked to Henry about it. He thinks this. I said, you know where he is? Because at that point, Henry Hill was in hiding. And my brother said, yeah, I speak to him.
Wow. Very cool.
Okay, let's move on. I want to talk about the kerfuffle, one of my favorite words that we use on this show, over Dave Chappelle's surprise appearance at a John Mulaney comedy concert. I think it was this past week. For those who may not have heard about it, John Mulaney, a very funny stand-up comedian, was on tour at one of his shows. He invited his friend Dave Chappelle to open for him. Dave did it, not for the money, but because his friend had asked him to, and they thought this will be cool, the two of us on the same bill. And of course, Chappelle went out and did some of the jokes that he tends to do now, making fun of trans people or LGBT people. And some people in the audience were offended that Dave Chappelle showed up on the show that they paid to get into, and they weren't expecting to see him. They were just expecting to see John Mulaney.
I personally would be excited if Chappelle showed up, at that show. I mean, I would be like, oh, wow, great.
So how did we get to this place in this country where people think that they get to not only have an opinion about a comedian, but that they get to produce the show and tell the headliner who he could have opening for him?
So that show was in Columbus. And 2 days before, he was in Cincinnati. And a lot of my oldest child's friends went to that show. And I've taken my kids to see John Mulaney before. Okay. I took my kids to see John Mulaney. I think the youngest was maybe 10 at the time, 11, because John Mulaney's his material's pretty clean. I mean, if you've ever seen any of his stand-up material, it's very clean and it's pretty wholesome. And he swears a little bit. And I don't know what his stuff is like now that he got out of rehab, but it's still, pretty PG-13. And this is where the issue, I think, arose, that they were not expecting someone to come out and do some pretty rough stuff or they weren't expecting that. It wasn't on the show bill. It wasn't on the ticket. It was a surprise. And so all of a sudden, sit down at your seat. Now, granted, they could have gone out into the hall for 20 minutes, but well,
first of all, that is the answer. Hey, I'm not a Dave Chappelle fan. They just introduced Dave Chappelle. I'm here to see John Mulaney. I'll go out and grab a drink or a smoke or go to the bathroom and sit it out. But don't complain and say the world is upside down because they added a special guest to the program, which, by the way, added probably $200 of value to each ticket. When I worked,
about to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, after being, in quarantine for a couple of years, you're out seeing shows again, and then you're going to complain that you don't get one incredibly famous comedian out there, but you got two. It's like,
when I was a doorman at the Comedy Store in the early 80s, and also when I worked at the Improv as an MC, we would, and anybody who's ever gone, more than once or twice to the comedy stores, to the comedy clubs, that occasionally you'll go in and they'll have a list of the people who are going to come on, and then it'll say in there, and a special guest, or sometimes they don't even announce it. And then you're sitting there, you're watching these comics that you're enjoying, but you've never heard of them. And most of them have never been on television. And all of a sudden, ladies and gentlemen, we have a little treat for you. And this is back in 1980, Robin Williams, and he would come on stage, or Richard Pryor, Jay Leno, or, and I could go down, Sam Kinison. People would go nuts. They would be so thrilled. Nobody ever went, hey, I don't like Sam Kinison's act, or I don't like Dice Clay's act, and I didn't pay to see this. I wasn't, no one ever said that. Yeah. But all of a sudden, we live in a time when people are so fragile that, first of all, they cannot sit through a stand-up that they don't necessarily appreciate all of his material. And secondly, they feel that they get to edit the show. So, yeah, it's...
I agree with exactly you said, Kevin. When I knew we were going to be talking about this, it's like, whatever happened to just standing up and saying, I don't like this, I'm leaving. I've done that a couple of times in movies that I thought were so bad. And I was like, my life is too short.
Okay. And that's a $15, $20 movie, and you could ask for your money back. But these people didn't even have to miss what they paid to come for. Just go out into the back until he's off. That's all. And then go watch John Mulaney. Enjoy the rest of your night.
And we don't even know how bad or raunchy it was, because
actually the jokes are, you can find the jokes on. Oh, they're pretty offensive.
Well, they're offensive.
You keep correcting me today, Greg. I'm
sorry. I don't mean to. I don't mean to do that. But you can't find them. They're online. They're really.
Okay.
I was offended.
Is it 10% of the responses, or is it more?
Greg is about 40%.
Is it 43 of the responses of this comedy show, or is it more? That's what I want to know.
It's a little bit more. It's a little bit more.
Unless anybody has anything else to say about this. Anybody else have anything to say on this topic?
I'll say one more thing. Look, if Sam Kinison was, if you were at that show and you had paid, it's different from back then, because you were at a show to see new stuff, and you had no idea. Okay. But if you were at a show and you got there and they were insulting you directly or offending you directly, and you were like, hey, I just paid $200 to see this show, and this is not what I paid for. I don't want my money going towards this. Okay. I don't want my money going towards
The audience doesn't get to make that choice.
Actually, that's the whole thing about being an audience member.
No, not when you're going to a live show. And musicians do that all the time. They bring out somebody else. They say, hey, guess who's here? Now you can say, well, there's nothing, controversial about Billy Joel coming out all of a sudden. But still, you don't get to edit. You don't get to produce the show. You're there to watch it. And if you don't like something,
and why is everyone getting this whole thing of everyone getting so offended? I just watched a 12-minute piece that George Carlin did where 10 minutes of it was him being terrible, making fat jokes. Okay. They were funny. And I wasn't offended. I was like, I'm just wondering, what's happened to our society where, I care about people's feelings, but I think if you go to a comedy show, you have to kind of leave that sensitivity at the door because these comics are doing work that is very difficult and they're bringing a lot of stuff up, irony, whatever. They're making us look at stuff that is uncomfortable. That's their job. And it makes me so sad when these comics, because there's so few of them. And then, now the social media is out there and people bring their phones in. I'm sure a lot of comedians just said, I can't take this anymore because everything I say or do, I'm going to get attacked. So I don't know what's happened to the world. But when you look at George Carlin and his work, who was a genius and brought up a lot of very important commentary that we had to think about, he wasn't worried constantly about people's feelings. Thank God.
That's one of the topics that I wanted to butt the show on. Was his documentary, which I saw it and I loved it. I don't know whether anybody else here had a chance to watch one or both parts of it, but I'd like to ask you guys if you did see the documentary, what you thought about it. And I think just talking about George Carlin is timely, given some of the subjects that are in the news now. And I often myself wonder, how would George have approached this? So with that said, anybody else here see the documentary?
No, I'm a huge fan of his, but wow, I can't wait to see it.
I actually watched it this week because I found out about it the same night that I found out there was a Kids in the Hall documentary. I'm such a comedy fan that I watched Kids in the Hall, and then I got a text reminding me about George Carlin, and I stayed up another however many hours. What is it? A 4-hour total documentary?
No, I think it's only a little over 2. It's two-parter.
It was probably 4 hours total between the two, but I stayed up to watch the Carlin documentary because being such a fan, just the deep dive they did and diving into his wife, which I wasn't aware of that. And it was just a real good insight into one of the greatest comic minds. And I actually wanted to know your guys' top 3 stand-ups maybe at the end of the show. Because I realized Carlin's got to be my number 1, maybe my number 2.
Carlin is up there. Yeah, let's talk about that now. I don't know that I could limit it to 3, but George is certainly up in any list of all-time great stand-ups. Pryor is up there for me. Robert Klein is up there for me. But I could go, there's so many that I respect that most people wouldn't put in one of those lists because they haven't had a chance to see that individual work live. Like, for instance, I will tell you, Jackie Mason was an amazing live comedian. Now, a lot of people appreciated Jackie Mason because they saw his 6-minute hunks on television, but see him work a room and you'll be blown away. But I could go down the list. There's many, many comics like that. Yeah.
Well, I have to absolutely give a shout out to one of my favorite stand-up comics, Elaine Boozler, who led the way for many, many female comedians, and love her. She does also a lot of incredible animal rescue work, but Elaine is there needs to be a documentary done on her for sure. And I love George Carlin. He always makes me laugh, uncomfortable laughter a lot of the time, right? I was talking about earlier, a lot of the laughter, you first laugh and then you go, ooh, is that okay to laugh? I think Chris Rock's hilarious. I like a lot of what he does. So I don't know if I have a top 3, but I love Joan Rivers would crack me up to like nobody's business. Like I found her, she was hilarious, everything out of her mouth. So.
Okay, I got to do this again to you, Greg.
Got to get some women out there, guys.
Greg, I got to do this to you again. Okay, because again, I live to impress you with my name drop.
Name drop.
Okay, first of all, one of the first comedians I ever wrote for was Joan Rivers, but let's take that off the table. Okay.
Oh,
Joan Rivers, we all know.
So you wrote all the great jokes I laughed at.
No. I only wrote a couple that she bought. But anyways, but it is one of the credits that I'm proud of. But Joan, as we all know, passed away during, I think she was having cosmetic surgery. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And there was a lawsuit against the doctor who performed the cosmetic surgery, right? I have another brother who's a lawyer.
I thought it was a brother.
Defended is the defense attorney for the doctor who was treating Joan Rivers when she passed away.
Well, so what happened? So what
I thought
happened?
he was the doctor.
I think they settled out of court. I don't know the details of it.
Joan Rivers came. Joan Rivers came to my university at like my first or second year of like parents' weekend. They always brought a comedian. They always brought someone very funny, and she did not do her like family friendly set, and she pretty much talked. I think she spent the entire time talking about a hysterectomy or something like pretty rough. And it was it was supposed to be like a 10 a.m. show. I mean, it was like, good morning, everybody. Boom. And the parents, and this was once again, Miami University, Oxford, Ohio, love and honor. The parents got up and walked. They were like, oh, my stars and gardens, and clutching pearls. And she was just like, and as soon as people start moving, she just got louder and just got bluer. And she's like, where are you going? Are you getting me coffee? Awesome. I mean, it was just laying into it. Brilliant. But as far as my favorites, Bill Hicks, no one mentioned Bill Hicks. Silence.
Oh, yeah. No, Bill Hicks.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. He was
on my list.
Yeah, he was on. Okay, now everyone's jumping on my bandwagon. Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah. Oh, Bill Hicks. Oh, Greg, you're smart. You know comedy.
And by the way, I think Ward Anderson is on everybody's great list.
Ward Anderson. I was going to finish with Ward. Thank you. Yeah. No. It was going to be Bill Hicks, Eddie Murphy, who I grew up with, who has not, his comedy does not age well.
Never met the man.
I wasn't going to mention Eddie Murphy because I assume you were going to tell a story.
Yeah.
And of course Chris Rock, and then of course Ward Anderson.
Oh yeah, Ward's like number 4. I added 4. I hope he's not.
I did mine
the
in
cleanup hitter
order.
on everybody's list.
What about Ricky? What about I just saw Ricky Gervais's show on Netflix. I watched that, and I guess he's getting some flack for saying some off-color stuff. And I'm like, well, yes, that's sort of what these comedians do. I didn't find any, I'll be honest. I mean, I watched it thinking I was going to be super offended, and I really wasn't. I was like, Ricky's doing Ricky. I mean,
yeah.
I recently heard Louis C.K. And it's difficult now to listen to him.
Mm-hmm.
He was doing, it was, I have a radio station that's just Comedy Central comedian clips. And it was him talking about, it was something about, him raising kids, and about him, child rearing, and about them being victims and blah, blah, blah. And through the whole thing, I kept thinking, you're an asshole. You're just an asshole. I mean, you keep talking about these poor kids and about how innocent and blah, blah, blah. And yet you sexually assaulted these women. And through the whole thing, I couldn't let go of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's been 2 years, 3 years. I know that's on me. But eventually I turned it off. It was like a 15-minute bit he was doing. I just couldn't get over anything he said without thinking, oh, you're such a dick.
Yeah, but don't you think a lot of these, a lot of comedians, when they get to, the level of actually, I shouldn't even say that. Just comedians in general, and Kevin, you've worked with a lot. I mean, don't you think part of their job is to go out there and see how close they can get without bombing, or sometimes they go out there wanting to bomb to see if a joke works or not? I mean, is that part of it? I mean, isn't that the way you work and act?
There are some people who like to get close to that edge. There are some,
yeah.
But I think it's more that your job is to get as close to the edge of offensive or in bad taste, to get as close to that edge as possible.
Yeah.
And when you're doing that, when you're walking a fine line, when you're doing a balancing act, sometimes you're going to slip too far to the other side. So for me, I happen to think that Dave Chappelle is a brilliantly talented comedian. I also think that Ricky Gervais is a brilliantly talented comedian. I also think that Chris Rock is a brilliantly talented comedian. That doesn't mean that everything they say I agree with. And sometimes they'll say things that I might think cross over a line. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to end their career over it.
Right. And what offends you might not offend me. What offends Joe may not, when I was listening to Ricky and his show, the part that there was a lot, he touched on everything. And oh my God, did he go places where I was like, oh, I can't believe he's going here. But if I have to say, if there's anything he said that just rubbed me the wrong way, is his constantly reminding people of how wealthy he is. And I was like, oh my God, you said it like 8 times. We get it. So that to me, I felt like an overused joke. He just kept playing it. I was like, okay, I got it. It wasn't making me laugh. Whereas I just watched a 15-minute thing that George Carlin did from beginning to end. I laughed. It held up like it could have been recorded last week. And Ricky's, as great as he is, I feel like sometimes he just does not. When I see him perform, I feel like he doesn't care if he hits it or bombs. He's just going for it. He is just like what he did with the Golden Globes when he hosted those shows. And he was just like, I don't care if everyone hates me. I am going to make this. I am just right.
Oh, yeah. You can't care. You can't care because the audience will sense that. Right. And, I happen to think that Ricky Gervais has become a shock comic. He could probably try to be more like George Carlin if he wanted to, or make some more politically meaningful statements in his comedy like Dave Chappelle. He does what's in his lane, which is being a shock comic. Mm-hmm. He's good at it. He's found, a comfortable place to make his niche in the comedy world there. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what he was doing with those jokes. Now, I haven't seen the special yet. It's on my to-do list. But I did, because I knew we'd be talking about this tonight, I went and read some of the material that he did. And I can read stuff and hear it in that comedian's voice. And I'm fairly confident that the jokes that I read, he was doing because he knew they would shock the audience, because he knew that people would go when they heard it. So let's say thank you to the audience for listening. We hope that you will share our link on your Facebook timeline and other social media so your friends can find us and enjoy us just like you do. Also, if you want to talk with us between shows, we're in a Facebook group called Open Fire Politics and Entertainment, and you can come in there and talk about politics or, Joe, what else can they talk about? Entertainment. I caught Joe napping.
I was going to say, you put me on the spot. I'm like, comedy?
Dogs?
Finger painting.
And by the way, we have a group called Open Fire Pets, Jennifer. However, it's not very much used these days, but we do have a group called Open Fire Pets that you can join.
I'll start moderating that one.
And Greg, we have one called Open Fire Sex and Relationships. That one is for you.
Why do you look at me for that? Jeez. Can't body shame me.